All right, Dustin, thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Vinny. I appreciate it.
No, pleasure's all mine. And I really wanted to jump in and kind of get your kind of in-depth take on how you acquired this 4-second Mosul Orb video, because it's been over 2 years since Jeremy and George first released the image, and we knew straight away back then that there was a video. Um, and I think most people in this subject know about the over classification and sort of secrecy of a lot of UAP videos. So when I saw that you'd managed to get hold of this video and heard it wasn't necessarily that straightforward, it really piqued my interest. So before we jump into that, if you could just give me a quick background on who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Dustin Slaughter. I am a independent journalist. I have been an independent journalist for over a decade now, but I really haven't dug into this topic until like maybe 3 years ago. Um, my first experience, well, my only experience with the topic personally was when I was around 10 years old. And I was coming back from my grandparents' house with my mother, and we were driving into central Pennsylvania. We had just crossed the Maryland border, and we saw an object exhibiting extreme maneuverability. It was late at night. It freaked my mother out so much that when we got home, she started calling the news station. She called the police, and you know, the authorities were basically like, yeah, we've been getting calls about this thing all night, yada, yada, yada. So that was sort of like my entryway into the topic. And then many years later, the New York Times story came out. And that's when I knew. I was like, okay, I've been using my skills as a journalist, getting access to records through the government locally, mostly, but some federally. And I decided I could use my skill set to start digging into this topic more, and to sort of like, not speculate about what the phenomenon is, or what these phenomena are, but really just to sort of get the bare bones, and get the facts from the government about what they know about the topic. So.
Amazing. So have you worked previously sort of in your journalistic career on kind of military or intelligence and government topics? Is that kind of where your background lies?
Yeah, I did. I was into police accountability on a local level, and then I branched out a little bit to work on uncovering some surveillance programs that the U.S. government was running. This was many years ago, um, but yeah, I've always used my skills as a person who knows how to access public records. So.
Interesting. So you mentioned there that you kind of got back into this subject or started writing about the UAP subject about 3 years ago. Coming into the subject then, where would you say you lay as far as being a believer on one end of the spectrum and non-believer on the other and everything in between? Where was your head at that time?
Um, I knew that there. I knew at the time, and I know now that there is definitely smoke. Where there's fire, there's smoke, and so I decided that it would be really important to sort of dig into it more, and all that. So.
Yeah, I think that's great. And would you say now that has that changed? Do you think the smoke's grown? Do you think it's got bigger?
Yes, big time. Exhibit A would have to be the UAP Disclosure Act. That was a huge factor for me. I mean, I've read plenty of accounts before the UAP Disclosure Act dropped from civilians as well as military people, and I knew that there was something there, but I also, um, the UAP Disclosure Act was like a real game changer for me. I knew that that's a perfect example of, these you have whistleblowers coming to the government talking about these programs or whatever, and we just have to get to the bottom of it, because the people deserve to know. So.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, with my time in this subject and how I feel now, I would say, I wouldn't always say I'm 100% believer. I would never go that far, but I think everything that I've seen and people I've spoke to has pointed to there being a non-human intelligence interacting with us today and maybe for millennia. Would you be on that same page?
I am open to um, the very real possibility that it's NHI. But my job, I see my job as I only can really publish what I can prove, or or at least present evidence to suggest that this is a thing. So, personally, I do think that it's probably NHI, but I don't really write about that per se. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm similar. I never really give my full views on things, especially when I'm interviewing a guest. I normally the guest does all the talking, and that's what people have really come to see. So I tend to keep my sort of thoughts to myself. But I would say at this stage, it does point towards NHI for me. But like I said, I'm not 100% there. Now, I wanted to talk to you mostly about this Mosul Orb video that was released, in the last couple of months, because, like I said, we knew it existed, and when I heard that it wasn't just a straightforward freedom of information request, it was really interesting that you'd kind of got past that barrier of like, being denied it, and a lot of people would sort of normally stop at that. So can you take us back to the start when you first, how you first decided to sort of attack this request?
Yeah, I it all started back when the Intelligence Authorization Act for 2022, I think it was passed, and in that language they talked about the they basically mandated the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, which is part of the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, to basically start collecting information on UAP to analyze what was going on. And that mandate was basically to work in tandem with, at that point, what was the UAP task force, which later became, well, other iterations into Arrow, of course. But um, the the thrust of the request was basically, initially it was for much broader, just records in general from NASIC about what they knew about UAP. And then as time dragged on, I decided that I needed to narrow the request to just videos, just because it was taking so long. And eventually, when they continued to drag their feet and said, "We don't have anything," I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to contact an attorney who specializes in FOIA litigation," and and then we sort of took it from there. We filed a lawsuit against the Air Force, and and then as that wore on, they um, they finally produced one video, which was the Mosul Orb. There was another video that they sort of already pointed to that was already basically had been publicly released, and then yet another one that they're still withholding in full on national security grounds. And the litigation that I filed is ongoing right now, so we're trying to get more videos out, and we feel moderately confident that that's going to happen, but we're going to keep digging. So yeah.
So give us an idea of who NASIC is and where they sit. Do they sit under the Air Force? And were your initial requests to NASIC or the Air Force? I'm trying to understand sort of the structure here.
Sure. So the initial request was to NASIC. The lawsuit itself, you have to sue the agency or the branch of the military that you want to get the records from, and NASIC does fall under the U.S. Air Force, so we ended up suing the U.S. Air Force. But the NASIC is it's part of a very interesting and storied history regarding the UAP topic, because it's located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and as I'm sure you and all of your audience knows, there's a lot of history. The air ATIC and some other entities, Blue Book, Grudge, Sign, Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book. All of those things sort of emanate from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So there's a lot of interesting history there.
Yeah, there was. So what sort of time scale are we looking at here between the initial FOIA request and the first response? And then from the first response, you mentioning, getting the lawyers and starting this litigation. What was the kind of block timescales throughout this process?
I think I filed the original FOIA request in 2023, and we ended up filing a lawsuit in 2024. So,
And how confident were you, would you say, that it would result in you receiving any kind of videos?
um, moderately confident. I always approach this work with moderate confidence because it's such a drawn out process, and you know, despite the power to take agencies and the military to court, you can't really you still can't really be certain that you're going to get anything. But I think it's important for anyone who's like interested in this and getting into this kind of work. You have to have fun doing it. Otherwise, it's you're not gonna finish it because it's just not. It's a really painstaking process and it drives you insane most of the time. So.
I can imagine. I mean, that you mentioned the first response you got is that NASIC didn't have any videos where they were mandated to analyze things like that. Would they have received videos from other military branches and agencies as well as the Air Force?
Yes. No, and I'm glad you brought that up. The request was basically just for any and all information submitted to NASIC by Air Force personnel. I could have gone a lot broader than that, but in my experience, when you start involving other agencies uh, with a FOIA request, it just doubles and triples the time. So I was like, okay, let's just focus on the Air Force for right now. I'll file stuff later for other branches and whatnot. So yeah, so basically it was for any information that was submitted by U.S. Air Force personnel to the NASIC, because the NASIC has allegedly incredible analytic capabilities, and I do think that they're holding on to more than what they've let on. So.
Yeah, I mean, you think so. You'd think they'd probably have a better analytic kind of equipment than Arrow, for example, who would be looking at these videos. So I'd imagine there'd be they'd be working together to some degree.
One would hope, but as I'm sure you and your audience are aware too, Christopher Mellon, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, wrote a really excellent piece that I actually have used pieces of in my lawsuit. Basically saying that the Air Force is stonewalled on this issue, and that they should know a lot more than they're letting on. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So since have you actually filed, for the Navy's videos and things like that? Have you got to that point yet?
God, I think I probably did way back when I first started, but I really haven't focused on the Navy per se. I figure that there's a lot of other people that are doing good work on that particular branch of the military. So I was like, okay, let's pull my resources here and let's try to focus on agencies that you might not think have information and see if we get surprised. So I actually filed a lawsuit or a FOIA request and eventually a lawsuit against the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration too, and that's an ongoing process. I'm actually much more confident that I'm going to be getting some information from that agency through that lawsuit too. So,
What makes you so confident with this one then?
because as of right now, they have we have basically forced them to search at least twice, and the first time they only came up with maybe a dozen documents or so. I may probably have that number wrong, but the second time they searched, they dug up a lot more. Um, and that's sort of like the usefulness of a lawsuit too, is because you can say to the judge, here's the reasons why we think they have more records than they're letting on, and they're basically obliged to search again. And so they haven't released any of those records yet because we're still waiting on one agency to finish their review process before they release the rest of these records. So right now I'm trying to figure out which agency has been holding up the release for like a year now. So.
And these lawsuits, they don't happen in court at all, do they? They're all, outside of court. So what's the process for the information coming through the judge and back and forth?
So these are really great questions. So yeah, they you don't really. I mean, in some instances, you do go to court for things, but it's pretty rare. A lot of it, it's basically administrative. It's like the judge says, okay, the parties have 30 days or 60 days to come back with a joint status report, which is basically like a summary of like what's been happening on their end, on the defendant's end, and that would be the defendant would be the government. I'm the plaintiff, and then that's as long as they are showing a good faith effort that they're trying to find things and locating records and getting reviews done. The judge basically just allows the process to continue. And so that's what makes it such a drawn out process. It's just like, back and forth for 30 days, 30 days, 30 days. And eventually, hopefully, you hit pay dirt.
So was this Mosul Orb video always like unclassified?
Um, I I don't know. Because there are redactions, I think, in the video.
Yeah, yeah, we'll get to that actually. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was weird because the government's attorneys in an email said, they one day they emailed my attorneys and I, and they said, oh, here's one of the videos that we found, it's attached, and that was it. There was no, I mean, they gave like a little bit of like information about where it came from, which was U.S. Central Command, or I'm sorry, U.S. Special Operations Command. So that video was floating around in presumably a NASIC system at some point, and they grabbed it and they produced it. But that's a good question. I don't know what the classification level for that was.
I mean, the reason I ask is because, we hear from different people about videos being overly classified, or maybe they're not classified and they're just, like you say, they're sitting around on some servers somewhere, and it's easier for them to deny a FOIA request than to release the video and give the people what they want. It really intrigues me how that works. So that's interesting. Now, you did mention there about the redactions on the video. When we got the image in January of 2023, you could clearly see kind of all the data around the screen from the sensor system that it was taken, or the platform it was taken with, but then that was redacted in the 4-second clip. Now, do you think there's good reason for that? Do you think it would give away information knowing that there's already some data that's in the public domain?
Um, I think that's probably just out of an overabundance of caution. I know that. Well, I'm not going to get into. I won't get into the Knapp and Corbell part of that screenshot or whatever that they released. But I don't know if it was properly classified or not, or redacted or not. But I tend not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If I can get something that is useful for public debate, public discussion, and it doesn't, you don't lose too much information or too much context. I just prefer not to fight those little details. So.
I understand. No, completely. So let's talk about the video itself. So before you received the video, and you'd obviously seen the image, and I don't know if you saw online the back and forth debates all across Twitter and stuff about what it is, what it isn't. It's a puddle in the road. Where were your thoughts at initially with what you thought it might be?
Well, knowing George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, I was very confident that it was like a legit unidentified, object. I didn't want to speculate beyond that, but I felt confident that what they had was not a puddle. So yeah.
And then what about the video once you saw that? I mean, obviously that confirmed to you that it was an object and it was real, but any further information? Have you ever been contacted by anyone outside, just with any information or anything?
Unfortunately not, no, but I really encourage anyone with information, um, to come forward safely, of course, legally, um, and share any information, or at least give it, any tips that they might have about where to go look for information, because that's very useful, because it's always best to have like a chain of custody to say, like, okay, this video came from, I can confirm that this video came from this agency, and that it was classified as unidentified at the time of release. So
Yeah. I think we're all fairly confident that it was taken in Mosul, Iraq, where, we've heard that's where it was taken. And we do then hear about other UAP, um, you know, UAP meaning UAP, not meaning NHI, but it's, literally unidentified objects over other war zones and that. Where does your head at with things like that? Do you think there's a chance these could be adversarial technology? And if so, it would be pretty advanced, right?
yeah, I mean, I think that in the large majority of cases of UAP, or objects that are they're filmed by the military, there's usually a prosaic explanation, right? But as we know from the history of this topic, dating back to like Project Blue Book all the way up to Arrow's findings, there's a small percentage of truly unexplainable objects, and that's what we really have to focus on, and that's what we need to pressure our governments to do, is share more information about what those unidentified objects, or to get more, to release more information about those unidentified objects.
Yeah, and I know Jeremy stated when they released the image in January 2023 that this was designated UAP by the government or the military, which, is quite a big deal. Do you think it's possible to go one step further with the freedom of information and actually request the analysis information or anything like that?
Sure, yeah. I and some other researchers um, are currently working to get released um, intelligence assessments on UAP. And in the U.S., the FOIA target for that is basically the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and that gets into much uh, thornier issues, because you're dealing with national security, and the weight of getting that information out is much more difficult when it comes to national security stuff. So, but we are, there's myself and some others are working on trying to get intelligence assessments out on about some of these objects that are being witnessed by service members and other members of the government. So
Yeah, no, that would be really interesting if something like that was released. I think that would really give us some more, a better picture on how the government perceives these objects and what they're kind of doing towards working out what they are and maybe avoiding some of these interactions that they've been having over sensitive areas, whether it be overseas in war zones or even over the military bases, in the US itself. So that's interesting. And you mentioned that you're working with others. Have you spoken with John Greenwald at all? Because he is kind of the known for the sort of FOIA work.
no, I haven't really spoken to him about that. I've been working with some other people that I'm friends with, and who I know, like, on a personal level, um, and they're just as dogged as anybody else, and we're hopefully between, one of us is going to hit some pay dirt, and people will have more information. So
Yeah, strength in numbers, absolutely. I mean, it's just fantastic that this video came out because, even if it doesn't give us any clear indication on whose it is or what exactly it is, it did take this one step further from the like we talked about earlier, the puddle theories and things like that. So I think that was really, really interesting and really good work to see that released. And is there anything else that you want to sort of bring up about the Mosul Orb? Because I do want to sort of touch upon another case.
yeah, no, I think that covered it pretty well.
Excellent, excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, you recently, I think your latest article over on your Substack, which I am going to link in the description of this video for everyone to go and check out because there's so much good stuff in there. What can you tell us about this UAP sighting at Avon Park last year, 2024?
Yeah. Well, it was actually September of 2023. Yeah, 2023. Um, and this object, so it basically started out. Avon Park Air Force Range is located basically in Central Florida. There is a there's a there's a restricted range. It's a restricted range, and on the morning of September 15, there were four service members who were transporting small UAVs out to the range, presumably to operate or test, and the one of the service members noticed a metallic glint about 500 feet up in the air. They turned the other members of the I guess caravan, because there were two vehicles with four people, two people each in the vehicles, and they all turned and they saw this large metallic cigar shaped object, basically the length of three or four traffic helicopters, and this object was there, and then it wasn't. That's according to the FAA report that I got. Um, and I really want to get more information on this case because it's really fascinating. Um, but yeah, there was no acceleration, there was no visible means of repulsion. Like, this thing was just there, and then it wasn't. And yeah, that's basically it.
So where did you first hear about this? So
Yeah, so I on a regular basis, I file FOIA requests with the Federal Aviation Administration, basically just to get like a spreadsheet of all of their UAP reports that are reported by civilian pilots, by military pilots sometimes, and it's fascinating. I mean, a lot of it is very prosaic stuff. A lot of it Starlink, things like that. But occasionally you get those nuggets, you know. And in this particular instance, this report of this incident was initially completely redacted, and it had, like, indications of, like, this was like a military involved sighting, and I was like, okay, that's really interesting. So I appealed that. I asked them to basically review that redaction and urge them to unredact it and release it, and they finally did after several months. Um, and that's how I learned about this object. So
did any of the UAV operators' names, were they all unredacted, or unfortunately were they?
no, that there was nothing. Their names were not even included in the report. But what was interesting was that, the report basically consisted of um, their superior officer, their range officer there on duty at the time, started getting text messages from one of the service members saying, really excited text messages saying, "We just saw a UAP. It was a cigar shaped thing, and it disappeared right in front of our eyes." Um, and so that was what that report consisted of, is basically just like text messages. But just to give you an idea of how the reporting process happened, the initial sighting was reported to the range officer. The range officer then contacted the military desk at basically like an air traffic control or regional hub in Florida, and then that information was relayed from the military desk to the Joint Air Traffic Operations Command, which is called JTOC. That's basically like the highest echelon of FAA security. So they basically get the most interesting stuff. So when I file the FOIA request, I always say I want to see what JTOC got, and this incident was definitely reported to JTOC, and that's how I got the report.
So through that process, jumping from place to place before it kind of gets to the FAA, do we know that if the four individuals gave, statements, each of them gave a statement, and was that information threaded through, or because it almost sounds like things might get lost in that, like,
Yes,
step by step process.
you're right. I mean, I there's always the risk of that, right? So Um, the problem is that right now, this incident, I don't know. I'm assuming that statements were taken, um, because usually interviews are conducted with witnesses after, particularly with JTOG, witnesses or interviews are conducted with witnesses after an incident. Um, but right now, this incident is still under investigation by the El Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. So
And how do we know that? Just out of interest.
they confirmed. I got a confirmation from their spokesperson that they were still investigating this incident. So it's considered still an open case. So
I think what compels me or excites me somewhat about this case and similar cases that we've heard about is that you've got 4 military witnesses, credible straight away, but these are UAV pilots, which makes you think that they're very used to seeing, like normal pilots, being trained to see things in the sky and be able to identify them. So for them to witness something like what you suggested they did and it disappearing, seems compelling, like I said. So
yeah, I mean the funny part about this report too is that it even states in the report that there was no so the witnesses were the drone operators, right? So they were transporting the drones out to do this to fly these things, and they reported this incident. And what's also interesting about this report is that they confirmed. Well, the investigators confirmed that there was nothing tracked going into the range. There was nothing tracked going out of the range. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a really good case, and I really want to get more information on this. So if any of those service members are out there, please contact me because I'd love to talk to you. So
absolutely. Yeah, that would be incredible. It's always good whenever we get any kind of witnesses coming forward. And, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of sightings, in fact, longer than a couple of years, but a lot of sightings that involved objects around the size of a standard UAV or a drone. And, we can sort of touch upon that as well in a second. But when you're talking about an object that's completely different, it's huge, it's metallic, like you again suggested there, I find them, even more interesting because you think if these guys are trained and they're seeing something like a drone, they're going to know that straight away because they know about these kind of things. So again, that's just that extra bit of excitement is when you hear about these huge or extremely large objects. So
yeah, and they're texting their superior officer with like exclamation points, like, well, yeah, it's really compelling stuff. So
excellent. And I'm sure as your investigation into this progresses, you'll be releasing information via your Substack. Is that kind of your main outlet when you get new bits of information? Excellent, excellent. So again, I urge everybody watching or listening to go and check out the Substack linked below. Now, I want to touch upon this. I came across another article on your Substack, which is this Pantex photo from September 2015, and the photo that you've kind of embedded in your article is kind of this enhanced image, but it's a really bizarre shape. So what can you tell us about the facility, the case, and your kind of writing on that?
yeah, so the Pantex nuclear facility is a nuclear facility is a basically these days it dismantles nuclear weapons. Um, there's not a lot of production going on, but there's still it's a very very sensitive site for obvious reasons because you've got stockpiles of plutonium that are just basically there at the base. But anyway, this this incident occurred in 2015, and the I got this report from the Department of Energy, and I was kind of surprised very surprised that I got this out of DOE. Um, but the plant is located in Amarillo, Texas, or near Amarillo, Texas, um, and basically at some point on September 2nd, 2015, plant security observed this object basically breaching the perimeter, moving through a portion of the facility, and then exiting. And it basically it compelled the security forces on at that location to follow this thing for several miles after it left the base.
Were they seeing this visually with their eyes, or was it on a sensor system?
I think it, no, I believe it was visual. I believe it was visual. I don't know for certain, but I think that it was visual. So anyway, yeah, this the initial image when I got this report was redacted, and I appealed and fought that for a while, and eventually they released um, as you said, an enhanced image of the object that was analyzed by Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, which is a lab connected to the Department of Energy. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of that report remains redacted. Um, so there's a lot more details about what actually happened that day that we just don't know. And I am the first to admit that the image is a little underwhelming, but as you noted, it's a really really strange shape. Um, and the DOE uh, continues to maintain that this is an unidentified object. So they don't know. And what's really concerning about that, obviously, is that you have, again, it's this recurring theme of these unidentified objects flying through sensitive airspace with impunity. Right? There's nothing. There's it's the same thing that's happening with the Navy, with the Air Force, everybody else in their training ranges. I think that the public has a right to know more about what's going on in these instances, because it's very concerning. So
It is indeed. I mean, one of the big ones in the last couple of years again has been the Langley incursions, where it got to the point it was happening so frequently they had to move a squadron of fighter jets off base. Have you looked into that case at all?
I have some pending requests on that, but there's other people that are doing really really good work on that too. So I'm not as focused on that. So
I'd always found that fascinating because it gets to those extremes. You want to know what on earth's happening that they can't control things coming into the airspace over the base. You'd think these are some of the most sensitive bases in the world, yet things like that still happen. And you look at the drone flap. What were your thoughts on how that kind of played out? Because it was happening in various places, not just the US, but it just seemed to continue. And then we got this mass hysteria, and it then got muddied with people shooting video of regular aircraft and drones as well, leading up to the final thing of, well, not the final thing, but we had Trump saying he was going to get to the bottom of it, and then eventually when he was in term we had it, oh, it was just FAA authorized whatever it was. I mean, what were your thoughts again at the time and then since?
baffled, absolutely baffled. Just like I don't. Yeah, I'm not going to get political here, but I do I don't buy that explanation from the Trump administration. I just don't.
No, and I mean, look, I mean, I'm all for people having theories and stuff. What I don't agree with is the people just saying that these are NHI objects morphing into airplanes and things like that. That's just going way too far for me. But I think it's interesting, and it's still, I still see how it fits under the UAP subject, because I think a lot of things these days we don't always go straight to aliens and NHI. It's all kind of under that same thing. I mean, look at the work Arrow's doing. So I found it interesting, and I certainly didn't buy the FAA research authorized malarkey either. So again, yeah, there are good people doing work. I just hope it's something we do eventually get to the bottom of, and it's not just one of those things that's died down and then never to be heard of again. We had that with once we had the balloon situation over the US, and again, I think that was early 2023, and these other objects that were shot down that we again never heard anything about. It gets quite frustrating.
It is very frustrating. Yeah, it really is. But I think that there are a lot of great researchers out there that are going to help us get to the bottom of what's going on. But the other thing too is that the history repeats itself. I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to see another wave of these mysterious drone-like objects doing the same stuff that we just saw that happen. And I just think that it's eventually we're going to have to we have to get answers about this. We have to. So.
I agree. Yeah, I think it is, and because I don't think it was the first time. We had things happening in 2019. We've had it off the east and western seaboards of the US, and over the mainland. I think some of the cases kind of don't get pushed that far out into the public zeitgeist. So I think, you know, it's definitely something that's been ongoing for a lot longer than originally maybe some people think. So like, I think you're probably right. We are likely to see it again in the not so distant future. But like, yeah, I hope this time it elevates enough so that actually something gets done about it. Whether it does just turn out to be prosaic, it's still national security, and if our adversaries are able to do that kind of thing, then it's certainly worrisome.
Extremely concerning, yeah, particularly because of where some of these drones were being spotted. You know, it's like was it Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey, I guess it was, and obviously Langley, and Chris Sharp of the Liberation Times done some fantastic work on the Langley stuff, and I think between him and other people, we're gonna hopefully we'll get more answers in the future. So.
Absolutely. Well, Dustin, again, I want to just like thank you again for the great work that you did, especially on the release of the Mosul Orb video. Is there anything that you're working on that you can tell us about that you're looking forward to, or anything you've got planned in the near future?
I am cautiously excited about uh, records I'm going to get from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, because there's a laundry list of agencies that I know that were involved in that record production that haven't been released yet. But I think there's going to be some interesting stuff from there. Um, Beyond that, I'm sort of not taking a break, but I'm kind of stepping off the gas a little bit. I want to help some other people learn how to file FOIA requests. I'm kind of waiting for some of these other requests to come through. I'm waiting for these lawsuits to finish, so I'm taking a little bit of a breather to focus on some other personal projects. But yeah, as of right now, I'm not working on any stories that I can really talk about right now.
Understood. Yeah, I suppose a lot of these cases that are so open still and ongoing, I think it would dictate when you get a response, dictate and to determine how you then proceed with them if they don't, come up with any new information that you've requested. So I suppose that's the way it has to be, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the rub with this kind of work. But I'm very confident that there will be other lawsuits in the future. I work with a fantastic legal team that are actually really open minded about this topic, and they're just as interested in it as I am, which was a shock to me. Um, yeah, and so I think once these other lawsuits resolve, and I can pony up some more money for stuff, I'm going to be filing some more stuff against other agencies in the future. So.
Great news. Wonderful to hear. Really excited. Again, I'll urge people listening and watching to go and check out your Substack to follow that. And also, I'll link your X account below as well so people can check you out there. But once again, I just want to say thank you so much and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Vinny. I'm a huge fan of the show. So.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Bye for now.